Hi, everyone. Welcome. More people coming in here. This is good to see. What's that? Yes.
What's up, Albert? Good seeing you. Hey, Chris. Welcome.
Yeah, what's up, Tyson?
Yo, Tyson.
Tyson's a celebrity in this space now.
Heck yeah. You heard this guy flow?
Yes, I have. In person.
Man, only through Zoom for me, man. Only there around the digital campfire.
I flow to manifest futures where we're making music around the physical campfire. That's what I'm dreaming into.
Awesome. There's James. Cool. More and more people coming in. There's Martin. There's Albert. Welcome, everyone.
Hello. All right.
Hey,
So just so you know, everyone, we are live streaming this. We totally encourage you to turn on your video and be part of this and ask questions. Tyson's going to facilitate a lot more today than usual because we have a bit of an unstable connection and we're kind of at the farmhouse looking for more property at the moment. So a little bit of chaos for us. So I'm going to pretty much pass it over to Tyson now. If you guys are not doing video, you can also chat in the just by pressing the chat button at the bottom. If you guys are watching this on the live stream, we'll try and keep up with the chat, but you're a lot more likely to get your question heard if you join the Zoom call. So I encourage you to do that. Do we have a link for that, Tyson? That's obvious within the YouTube live stream.
Oh, a link for the live stream?
Or no, for the Zoom call within
futurethinkers.org/summit. For anyone watching live, that would be the easiest way to find it.
Awesome. Thank you. More and more people coming in here. So yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Tyson. UV and I will jump in on occasion with questions and just kind of doing some facilitation if we can. But again, our internet's a little unstable today. So Tyson's going to be the master of ceremonies tonight.
Okay.
So take it away,
Thanks,
Tyson.
Mike. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here at Smart Village Summit. I'm really looking forward to this event. And we've got some awesome guests here today to speak with us about leadership and community building in a smart village. So I'm going to start by introducing some of the guests here today. And before I do jump into that, James is here with ReGen Villages, a partner in these events. James, would you like to say hello, introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm James from ReGen Villages. Hi, everybody.
All right, awesome. So today with us, we have Seishin from Willow Monastic Academy. She is a teacher and executive director at Willow Monastic Academy, which is the new Canadian branch of the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth. So thank you for being here. It's awesome to have you. Joe Lightfoot is in the room. He's the author of A Collective Blooming, The Rise of Mutual Aid Community. And his podcast explores ways to cultivate a truly regenerative and planetary culture. That's the Lightfoot podcast. Yona Meseritz is in the room. Yona is a realtor helping groups buy land for their community project. He's going on 10 years of living in intentional communities and is currently working on a new ProtoB project. Yona, it's really good to have you here. We've got Chris. Oh, great. Yeah. What's your wife's name?
I'm Rebecca. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Rebecca, welcome.
The top half of me.
Good, really good to have you both here. All right, we've got Chris Casillas in the room. Chris leads Regenerating Sonora, a nonprofit focused on regenerative community development. He also serves on the board of directors for the Center for Shamanic Education and Exchanges. Chris, thank you for being here. And Lena is in the room. Lena Cole. She's an artist and co-founder of True North, which is a land-based project on 414 acres in Hudson, New York, with the vision to reinvent social, ecological, commercial, and medical systems through regenerative action. So Lena, thank you for being here. All right. And let me see, Nico's not in the room yet. Cool. So our conversation today, guys, is going to revolve around leadership and building community. So if anyone has questions around those topics or anything that comes up here in the call today, please enter them in the chat. I'll call on you to ask your question. So if you have questions around leadership and community development, you can go ahead and start entering them right now or anytime throughout this call. And we would love to hear from you and have you ask your question. So do be active in the chat. I want to share one other thing before we get started, which is a working document that we can all collaborate on. And so if there's any resources that come up, any notes, key takeaways, questions that you would like to add, feel free to keep track of them in this document here. All right, cool. So I want to start us off with a question. And my question is actually around challenges and obstacles that have been present for any of our guests here around leadership and community development. Like what's a leadership challenge that you've experienced recently, and what was your process, your approach? What did you do to move through that, to overcome that? Or a challenge that you feel is present for yourself and your project, or that you feel is present for the collective, and how you are thinking about approaching that. But yeah, specifically, is a leadership challenge alive for you now, from any of our panelists here? Joe, I see you shaking, nodding your head.
Yeah, thanks, Tyson. My community of 5 or 6 years, about 150 people, went through a full-on civil war this year and split in half, and is a day or two away from dying completely. So I've kind of been in the heart of really heartbreaking and intense and very rich and learning experiences, kind of a process with my community. So yeah, there's quite a lot to unpack in that, but definitely, yeah, is there anything you want to poke at in that to learn a little bit more, or any particular area of that you'd want to potentially learn from?
Well, first, thanks for sharing that, because that's definitely challenging, and especially to put it publicly like that right now. Yeah. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm pretty heartbroken, because I set the community up, and it was the community that led me to write the book. Yeah, it happened about 6 months ago. The coronavirus and a wave of racial activism that both happened at the same time kind of put a lot of stresses on the community, and the activists in the group kind of found their voice, and it became a space for great division to unfold in what was a really, I think the interesting lesson is just how close people were and how deep we were. We were 5 years into the process, so there was no thought that it would kind of tear apart that way. And to see how quickly it can happen has basically led me to think, how do we prepare for that? And it's something I want to explore with you guys, and reach out to you after this of ways I've been thinking to really create the kind of the love and the context to ensure that conflict goes in those healthy directions. Because we have some conflict resolution experts in the community. It was very humbling to see, I guess, is what I'd say, how quickly that can come through. But yeah, you learn a lot from those experiences too.
What do you feel was the main rift? Like, what was the kind of the line that separated people for one side or the other?
Well, what kind of happened was there was an inner core and an outer ring. And that wasn't so explicit. And that's something that I've learned after this, that there was like a culture that was there that people on the periphery, they didn't quite know about. So they assumed it was kind of more of a Facebook group type thing. Well, as to this inner core, it was like a neo tribe that we were forming together. So it was people more on the periphery that we tried to be very inclusive of. So the kind of like really bring people in close. They went through a very traumatic process, reclaiming their voice as racial activists, and brought that message and this kind of reframing of the whole racist idea into the heart of the community when there really wasn't any issues around that. So it was kind of confusing as to what was going on. And it was kind of along those fault lines, which we've seen play out in different parts of society. And was tragic because it was well-meaning from every side, but very quickly, I think there was a bit of a failure of leadership on my behalf and the other admins of maybe being a bit too generous, to be honest, kind of like, let's include all voices. And early on, there was some quite intense behavior that perhaps could have been policed. I mean, I don't want to do that though. As soon as that happened, I felt like the whole culture of the project had changed. If we were going to police it, then yeah. And that's broadly links as to my idea of forming collectives to hash this stuff out before moving into the eco-village phase, which is my same dream. And yeah, I'm keen to explore that with you guys and how to set that up for these projects going forward.
Thank you for sharing, Joe.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to share their leadership challenge that is alive for them now?
Go for it, Chris.
So the idealism of, yeah, let's get something started, we're going to get all organized and we're going to do a bunch of really good stuff, turns into sometimes people getting together and everyone bringing their own like personal relationships that they have outside of the container of doing the work into it, and the dynamics can get real funky. Like I left the corporate world to get out of the whole political, and sometimes working with close people who we're just really close with, we have our own like stuff that we're working through as human beings relating to each other that starts to come into the work that we're doing. And it's like an energy drain, and it like starts to reduce the flow of decisions that are being made. And for us, that was when we realized that bringing on something like sociocracy as a way to build a more effective container to do the context specific work that we're there to do was so critical, because it allowed us to just stay focused, work on the thing, and that creates momentum when we make decisions, and then everything starts to ripple from there. So yeah, I guess the idea of just seeing patterns of dysfunction happening and saying like, okay, like, do I want to just continue to just watch this happen or take some type of active approach? And how is this actually an opportunity? What potential is inherent in the situation instead of seeing it as a problem to begin with? That's the from problem to potential reframe, and seeing that we can actually, it's actually an invitation to step our game up. So we went from like doing pretty good and every once in a while, like kind of getting some stuff about making a decision, to bringing in sociocracy, flying in Diana Leaf Christian, which I know that some other folks here have worked with, that I'd love to hear more experience with that in a little bit. Yeah. But bringing in someone who we know is an expert in this domain to come and train us on it. So we got like 3 days with her here in like the room that I'm in now, teaching us the system that we are now using. It's been about a year, and I am so thankful that we had these squabbles in the beginning, because it was an invitation to something way better that we're now a part of. And I'm just incredibly grateful. So yeah, there's more to get in with that, but I think that's a long in the.
Thanks, Chris. Does anyone else want to share something? Yeah, Lena.
We've had similar dynamics come through, and I want to be cognizant and just name that this is also a very white male dominant space. And how are we really like understanding that these are really labors, and in the labor room you have to choose really wisely who's with you to be involved in these creative birthing processes, and who can really hold the understanding that maybe now we're in a time of needing to have ownership over reparations and actions that have happened in the past, in ways in which we were brought into a society that was deeply fractured and quite tormented, to be frank. But how are we really holding this higher vision and cultivating our room of people who really want to hold these discussions and be in this birthing process and have this higher vision of who we are and where we're going, and how we can work together to pull something through that's honestly hasn't been on this earth in a very long time. This image for me always comes through is, how can we return to an understanding in the Sahara Desert, when everyone is at the watering hole, everyone is safe and every being is allowed to drink from the water. And that, to me is really the source from which we're pulling this creative vision down through. And anything other than that becomes diffusive, and the personal dynamics and all of these ways in which we can get in our own way, in our humanness, before we can actually do the creative work that we're here to do. So just, yeah, totally meeting these dynamics of how can we, yes, make sure that enough voices that are diverse are holding the space in the room so that we can cultivate this magnetism that attracts nature to really come and co-create with us, because that's the force that we're aligning with. But to not mathematically do that or calculate that or have it be from this kind of autocratic methodological approach, but really be from an authentic birthing space, while acknowledging that this is a really privileged way in which we're having the ability to approach these conversations in general.
So Lena, I just want to mention that to me, in other ways, it's like relating as living organisms, and it's like transcends culture and these stories, these other things. We're living organisms there at the watering hole, just like you're saying, or running around in the desert, and that's fine and good. And relating from that point of view, I think what you're pointing at in some ways, and it's beautiful and profound.
Yona, seeing your hand going up, jumping anytime.
Yeah, I'd say that leadership for our current community and the one we're building has been really amazing. And some of the experience that I have when helping other groups lead is I kind of say, hey, you need a driver or a group of drivers to start the build, but it also, the hope is that you can create a membership situation where you're equalizing it. Like right now in our future community, we're having a little bit of Rebecca and I are on the deed right now, but how do we create an LLC, and make it so other people feel comfortable investing their money, feel like their voices can be heard, have a share. So it's really, the interesting thing about leadership, as Chris was talking about sociocracy, is like, how can we decentralize all the leadership, but also through facilitation, through good methods, be able to hear from the quiet ones and make sure that everyone is feeling like they're a part of the wheel that is leading the entire community. And just also my experience in helping other groups is when that's not done, you'll have one loud voice that says, this is how we should do it. And this is what eco villages are like. And like 3 months later, as they're trying to get into escrow, people are jumping ship, realizing I don't actually want to be led here. I want to be part of the team. So leadership, I'd like to just offer, I don't know if you have something else for that, but leadership is how can we share that leadership and create a full team of all members doing good work?
That's really good. And that brings up a question for me, which is, oh, sorry, Rebecca, you go ahead and I'll ask my question.
I was just going to say, just sort of adding on to that, is like part of what I hear and what happens a lot of times in the group dynamics is that Chris, who worked with Diana, will know that she calls it, community is the longest and most expensive personal growth workshop you'll ever take. And so it's yes, 100%. It is all of that. And just coming back to, are you choosing partners who are taking their personal growth and their personal responsibility for their personal experience seriously? And are you yourself taking your experience and your personal growth very seriously, and really looking for the opportunities to let go of your ego need for control, or your desire to be seen, or your desire to hide? How is all of that showing up inside of your leadership struggles and inside of your collaboration struggles? Because ultimately, if this work that you're doing as a leader or a collaborator isn't helping you to grow, then you're probably not paying attention. So just throw that in the mix too.
Seishin, you want to try and jump in here?
Yeah, thank you. I can't tell how good my connection will be, so let me know if it's super choppy. Yeah, all of this is really resonating for me, and I think probably one of the biggest challenges in leadership that I've had is that combination of holding the collective and also holding the individuals. and committing to everyone's growth. And so we're a Buddhist organization, but we also bring in a lot of modern modalities. We do a lot of healing work, emotional healing. And so it's really interesting when we're, trying to figure something out together, and then we start getting into some sort of argument. Then that's actually this really beautiful opportunity to start looking at what is it that's happening, what is connecting, and really taking that, like Rebecca said, the sort of, I don't remember the word used, but the self-maturation aspect of it, the self-growth aspect of it really, really seriously. Because as far as I can tell, a community can't continue without something like that. So I think that balance of those two things is vital. And no matter, in my view at least, no matter how many systems we put in place, it can't work if we're only fixing it from the outside in. It has to also be worked on from the inside out. And I love that.
Tyson, I've got a question I'd like to ask some of the other
that'd be
panelists
awesome.
at some point. I'm interested at the moment in this balance between kind of older traditional leadership models and new emerging community leadership models. I wonder if you guys can relate. I'd like to hear your experiences around this idea of kind of, leading from behind, which is how I've been working in community spaces, of a little bit behind the shadows, empowering others constantly, trying to help them grow into other positions of leadership, which seems to create more of a flat structure, more of equality, less of a hierarchy, but can be a little tricky because you're in the shadows. You don't necessarily have that final call or that final voice, and it's this tricky balance between staying humble and invisible, but also in moments coming forward and maybe helping guide things in the right direction. And yeah, I'm kind of in the next iteration, the next community I'm building, I think I'm going to be a bit more forthright, and I'm going to be more of a presence rather than kind of that invisible game B leader, meta modern leadership idea that I had. And I wonder where you guys are at in that kind of pendulum swing behind the scenes and in front.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
I think it kind of, what my perception of it is, it really depends on like what part of leadership you're actually talking about. There's in this community that we've been a part of for 10 years, that we co-founded, the Emerald Village, we have basically a founders circle, which is comprised of the 10 founders, who are also the 10 owners of the property. So we formed an LLC and we bought the property together. And our responsibility is the long-term vision and sort of the financial responsibility, managing that. So that's where our leadership in that way comes into play. Like, we're thinking about big pictures, and also holding the energetic container for the community. Now, there's also we use sociocracy, and so we have multiple circles that hold different things. We have a land circle, we have a finance circle, we have a human relations circle, which does more of the, the interpersonal relationships and classes and stuff to do with children. Each of those circles has their own leadership. And within sociocracy, not to get into a sociocracy training here, but within sociocracy, there's a format by which you select people for roles. And the person that is selected for the roles, it's not by a vote. It's not like, hey, I'll just do this. Like, I'm going to raise my hand. This is so good for me because I have what's called helium hand, where my hand just goes up all the time, even though I don't have the energy or the capacity to do the thing. I'm like, it needs to be done. I must do it. Right? I'm sure a lot of you know about that. So it helps people with helium hand to say, like, oh, wait, I don't actually need to be the leader here and now. Like, how about this? We as a group we use a decision-making process to determine who is going to be the best person for the role. And the best person for the role, for a leadership role, might be the person who's never done it before, who would grow the most from the experience. Or it might be the person who's done it the most and has been doing it for the last 5 years. And it's like, they've got it. It's an easy system. It's nothing for them to do it. So they should keep doing it. But I guess part of what I'm hearing is like, what kind of leadership are we talking about? There's a place for a visionary to be a leader. And as a community founder, yeah, you need to be you need to be at the forefront. You can't be like fanning other people. You need to be true to your vision and what you're hearing and bringing that forth without apology. When it comes to like the day-to-day operations, there's lots of other people that can like pick up and take on leadership. And that's where you want to fan their flames and be the wind beneath their wings and help them to do what they need to do. So that's how we do it here and how I believe we will continue to do it in our future project.
Does anyone else want to respond to that question?
I can go. We have, so we, like I said, we model ourselves after Buddhist monasteries, monastic academy specifically. And so there is actually a relatively clear hierarchy structure. But one thing that we do there is we have what's called a triumvirate. So three people who hold kind of three different pillars. The pillars are wisdom, love, and power. And so wisdom is, well, I'll start with love. The love people are, or the love person is responsible for taking care of and speaking from the perspective of taking care of the community and taking care of the broader world. The power person is kind of the one bringing money in, how do we actually keep this going? And then the wisdom person is kind of more on the traditional Buddhist side of actual teaching awakening practices and holding the container of kind of human maturation. And the three of them together make a lot of big decisions. And it's never, as far as I know, it's never, it's not majority rules. They have to somehow come to some sort of decision together. And sometimes that's just painful and terrible. And they just have to keep talking from their different pillars until something happens. And so far, it's been working quite well.
Can you reiterate those pillars again? And Tyson, do we have the notes in the doc? Because that seems like something really valuable to record here. If anyone, I think we're opening the doc, right? So anyone can contribute. Yeah, so Tyson will post the link here again. If you guys want to take notes as you go in the same doc, you're welcome to do so. But yeah, can you reiterate that again, the three pillars?
And I have an addition to that question. Do you ever have people holding more than one of those roles at the same time?
Yeah, so the pillars are wisdom, love, and power. And ideally, you shouldn't have the same person holding multiple roles, but it does happen. And we have this concept of kind of the I don't think we have a good word. The word we use is for all, but the person who can kind of start up another center is someone who is able to hold all three of those at the same time, to some level at least. But ideally, you have three different people who are holding the three different things. Otherwise, it just gets very hard.
Awesome, thanks for that. We're getting a fair amount of questions and stuff. You guys, especially the panelists here, please feel free to jump in. We don't have to do a super moderated conversation here. If anyone's not part of the panel, feel free to type your questions into the chat and we'll try and get to them as we go. Again, if you're on YouTube, go to futurethinkers.org/summit and you'll be able to jump into the Zoom call.
And we're focusing this conversation around leadership in communities specifically. If there are questions that have to do with other aspects of community, we can leave them till the end, or we usually have a different theme each month, so it might be a better fit for one of the next month's summits.
I just want to call attention to the love, wisdom, power triad that was mentioned. I mean, that is, for me, such a powerful meta framework that I personally work with and can see how so much of what we're doing can be guided by something like this. And I think in a way, an aspect of leadership is finding navigational tools and sharing them and socializing them. Tools for navigating through the sense-making situations that we find ourselves in now, all the way to how do we get a project done. And so that's just a point worth punctuating.
I'm curious.
Sorry. I just
go
wanted
ahead,
to shout out to my mom who's listening that she's been bringing forth beauty, wellness, wisdom, and love as her kind of understanding and methodological approach to all of this. And we use this vernacular, the pillars, for the different aspects of the project. But this is actually bringing me into a higher understanding that no, these value, that it's more than values. It is the pathway that can actually become the means and method of counsel and decision making. So thank you so much for that clarity of empowering the true essence of what we're really trying to cultivate without having to kind of sink into the structuring in the LSC zone to understand the pillars, that we can actually stay above that and elevate out and zoom out and hold from that space, the grid, at a more profound level. So thank you.
It reminds me of Starhawk's book, The Fifth Sacred Thing. Well, I'm not sure if you guys have read that, where different people embody the different archetypes in the group meetings with a different mask. I've got some amazing imagery of how you might be doing that, Willow. I hope it's as dramatic as I'm imagining.
I've had that book recommended to me, but I have not read it.
You know,
oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to mention the Regenesis Institute is an outfit out of Santa Fe, and they focus on training regenerative practitioners, and they're from a similar stream as Carol Sanford, if you're familiar with her and her work. And they talk about this triad that you could use, a will-being function, that everything that you're working with as a coherent whole has an aspect of will-being and function. And it's another way to start to work with these things and see it as an coherent whole, and then starting to fix in other ways structured that way has been very helpful for me.
I've got a question for you, Mike and Yuvi, if you're up for answering one, around your role in the village you're creating. At what point do you imagine, what's the ideal unfolding for you guys as to being leaders in the community? At some point, do you want to become on an equal plane with everyone? Or do you always imagine yourselves holding a kind of quasi-visionary role that kind of holds the vision and protects the energy of the project? Do you have a sense of that?
This is such a complicated question. And like the whole experience right now with leadership is something we're trying to figure out. And I would say most of our leadership experience comes from the startup world and business world. And we're here at the house that we were intending to buy. That deal has fallen through. But we've got a group of people here that are all going to be part of the initial project once it gets going. And so we've been having a lot of discussions about leadership and what that looks like, and how much in the driver's seat Yuvi and I should be, how much people want us to be there. And yeah, it's such a challenging question. Like, my view on it is that it's our responsibility, and the buck kind of stops with us. And that if the vision fails, or if like we're not discerning enough when new people come into the, sorry, I got something in my throat.
There's some water.
When new people come into the community and we're not discerning enough, and then we have these kind of like issues with dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, we have kind of that explosive element that a lot of communities seem to have experience with. I take that as a personal responsibility. Like, that's a failure of both mediating and discerning. Yeah. I've
taken a lot of lessons from my journey as a parent to how I see leadership. I became a mom a year ago, and I understand that it's my responsibility to birth a new being into the world, and then to guide that being, and then progressively reduce how much I'm guiding him, so that as he becomes more capable of doing things by himself, and as he learns things and develops his will and his preferences and his personality. And I see this kind of the same with the community. Like, at first, a lot depends on us. A lot depends on our vision, our capability, our hard work. And without that, since we're the initiators of it, without that, it simply won't happen. So I see this for the first couple years, our involvement being more necessary in this kind of guiding role. And then as momentum increases and as the community sort of becomes more autonomous in its processes, then stepping back a little more and just holding the container and holding the space. And when there's, you know, a leak in the ship, plugging that, or if there's a conflict, helping resolve that, but not, you know, having as much guidance in the future.
There's, you know, on the note of parenting, there is definitely, like, I'm kind of seeing this need for me to step into a natural role of being like a masculine leader on this work, and viewing things like suffering as a necessary part of the whole journey, and not trying to overprotect and prevent suffering and prevent conflict and that kind of stuff, but instead to lean into it. And, you know, like having a child now for a year has woken me up to the role of like small amounts of exposure and facilitating small amounts of exposure for our son. So, like, for example, he's walking around. We're in this house that we're in right now. We have we're heating the house with fire, with wood. So there's a fireplace in the main room that he's able to run around in. And I just know the way he is, he's not going to check. He's just going to like dive headfirst into the fireplace. So I did something kind of controversial. I took him up to the fire. I took his hand and I touched it to a part of the hot, like part that the fire had been touching and like heated up. It was pretty hot, like, but I just kind of touched it briefly and he's like, oh, okay, that's hot. You know, it wasn't painful or anything. Then I did it again and just kind of like got him some exposure so that he's going to manage his own experience around that fire. And there hasn't been a problem ever since that. So I think this is extremely important that we don't try and like overprotect and overbuff and like smooth all the corners and all the edges in a community like this. Like, people have to get used to and expect and be kind of stoic about suffering and about hardship, because that's the only way to deal with it. There's no such thing as systemizing this stuff away.
Yeah, and there's another bit that I wanted to add actually to some of the questions that were discussed earlier about you know, how to be a game B leader, or like how much do you step back and fan the flames of other people, or how much do you step forward. And I really like Richard Bartlett's approach to this. He's been working with decentralized organizing and with many organizations like Inspiral and others for years. And he was saying that the model that he works with is kind of leadership that is self-elected, but it has to be confirmed by the community. So you say, like, I have an idea, I want to do something, I'm going to go do it. And then people say, yeah, okay, I think that you can do it, and we can offer you this sort of support. So it's this sort of emergent leadership. And then when the project is done, you give it up. So it's not some formal role that goes on forever. It's just like, this project needs leadership, or I come up with this idea for a project and I need help, and other people can step up and say, yeah, we're going to do it together. So yeah, I really like that you know, form of leadership, because then if something needs to be done and other people can feel empowered to say, yeah, I'm going to start this project, and other people can say, yeah, let's do it together. You know, I can help you with expertise or with these resources. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Seishin was going to hop in. I just wanted to reflect one thing before that of something I've learned this next time around. Well, I got some interesting feedback after 5 years of leading, was that some of the closest people to me said, we didn't really feel you the whole time. We knew you were there with us, we loved you, but because you're in a position of facilitation and leadership, you were always a little bit removed. And I think that goes along with leadership in a lot of traditional contexts, but I think trying to melt that out of the way, because it's just good for our souls to really be in it and of it rather than separate from it. I mean, they say work on the business, not in the business, is the entrepreneurship model. And that has some, you know, that has some pros and cons. And I think in this system, I just imagine living there, I'd really want to feel you guys, because I feel the love and compassion from you, and putting you in a position where you have to create that distance. Maybe it's inevitable, but at least it's something that could be spoken to, and a dynamic that could be kind of seen by the group. So yeah, I'll hand it on to others.
Yeah, I hear you, and I actually have been thinking about this a lot. And recently, I was going through some challenges, like personal challenges, and instead of putting on a happy face and playing strong, I just broke down crying in front of the group, in several kind of different groups, like here at the house, and then also on one of our calls where we do this kind of group shadow work and sovereignty practice. And in both cases, people are really appreciative of it because they got to see me in my vulnerability. They got to hear about my triggers and my childhood trauma. And then, I wasn't this like infallible, strong person who's always got it together, and it just made me more human and more relatable. I think that's a good thing.
Has everyone seen that movie, David? I wish David Swedlow was here. Inside Out. David brings this up in like almost 100% of the calls that we do. There's always some analogy in this movie. But at the end, when sadness takes control of the controls in the little girl's mind, she creates this situation where she presents, like she like shows the emotions to the external world and gets support back from them. And that was a big kind of like awakening thing for me, because I've always been about like manage your emotions, don't show all of that. And like it's still a struggle for me to this day, but it definitely like allowing myself to just be vulnerable and like show my own weaknesses is almost the quickest way to get support, rather than like telling people I don't feel good. Just showing them that I don't feel good. People kind of have a natural desire to help. Yeah.
Can I jump in? I feel like this is one of the like tense dynamics that we're finding between leadership and wanting people to become involved, is that oftentimes when you're holding something, it's like physically the gravity is just denser, or there's just more that is being held in the body through trying to manifest these things. And oftentimes I found this almost like frustration when people ask to help, and I'm just like, I don't know, like it's just the gravity is so intense. And I find myself almost being so vulnerable in this process that I'm almost experiencing this tension of like, where do you actually have to call in the will and the action that just moves through and can execute beyond that, like beyond the labor pains and whatever that may be that like is being held. But there is this, I feel like for me, this like real tension between wanting to create in spiral, wanting to create in circle, and then the truth of how we're manifesting, which is just that the gravity is being held by a much more singular point than the whole in its current form. And so how to get from gravity being held in one place to being disseminated through a circle is really like what I'm seeking an understanding of as well, because there is this tense desire to have a shared dynamic that is lived in authenticity, but then there's also the reality of the situation. And so how do we move from these spaces with ease and grace and allow a more shared, exalted form of all of what we're meeting, so that we can create really together without, it's less hierarchy, it's just more gravity. It's like how nature is manifesting. So there's more question.
I would love to just jump in here on all this. I just love this. I love where the energy of this is going, and really like what it speaks to for me is the spiritual nature of what it is to be a leader, and the spiritual calling of what it is to be a leader, and the really, the imperative of whatever the circle or whatever the group that you're a part of. When you're stepping into a leadership position, when you give yourself the permission to be vulnerable, you give everyone else the permission to be vulnerable. When you ask for help, you give everyone else the permission to ask for help. And just the real beauty, especially in, I'm assuming we're talking predominantly about intentional community or communities that are intending to come together for a purpose of growth and connection. And so inside of that, I see this, part of what allowed this current community, the Emerald Village, to come together was a shared spiritual practice, a shared teacher. And part of our practice was coming together either once a week or once a month in a facilitated manner, and each of us sharing from our heart whatever our lived experience in that moment was. And it could have been like interpersonal relationships with our family, or it could have been, catharting over a romantic relationship that had gone awry, or it could have been just feeling yucky, whatever that means in that moment, just feeling bad, or processing grief, or processing anger, whatever that was. Having these moments where we, and still to this day, come together in regular times and expose our hearts and allow ourselves to be vulnerable and allow ourselves to ugly cry and show the truth of who we are. And also celebrate the beauty, celebrate the transcendence, celebrate those moments when like the divine is entering the space and all of a sudden you're just full of, whatever that is for you. And seeing each other in these incredibly vulnerable moments builds this bond and creates permission for us to continue to go deeper. And I really feel as leaders, I can't imagine anything higher that you could do. It's like giving other people permission to go deeper and to be more real and vulnerable. And from that place, people feel safe to do all the things that you want a leader to do, like take risks, throw out crazy ideas that just might never work, but just might be absolutely brilliant, And also from that place, people feel safe to give more and to show up more and to devote more and to pour their heart and soul into something that may or may not work, or may or may not work the way that everybody thought it was going to. And really, when you're starting a community or when you're maintaining a community, that like wellspring of life force energy is absolutely what's required. And so doing that emotional hygiene, energetic sharing hygiene, clearing circles or whatever that is, building that conviviality, as they talk about in the Game B world too, where you're like coming together and having the good feels because you've held each other through times. That to me is like kind of the answer to some of these things of like building that real deep connection that supports people to be leaders and to be led and to show up. So
thank you.
Take mushrooms.
Take mushrooms.
Yes.
The spiritual part of this is so important, but it's also something that like Yuvi and I don't really talk about a lot publicly. We talk about it a ton privately, but this like the prevalence of narcissism out there in the world has almost made narcissism invisible. Because it's just out there, like everyone's virtue signaling and tweeting all their smart, brilliant, unique ideas. And there's this problem with how we perceive leadership and how we engage in leadership, of it being kind of an avenue for self-expression, an avenue for like demonstrating to the world how good you are. And this is something that I think it doesn't get enough spotlight. How do you manage narcissism? And that is such a basis in spiritual practices and ego deconstruction. And it's been easily the most critical thing in like my business endeavors as a leader. And I can see its relevance even more with this project as it unfolds. Like managing your own narcissism as a leader is so critical. And you just see countless projects out there. We've had so many discussions just in the last couple of days about narcissistic leaders and how common and how problematic it is. So I think when the spiritual practice addresses that directly, and then the group also can feel comfortable pointing it out and kind of creating an immune system for narcissism, both for themselves, but also in a group dynamic, I have no experience that says this is what creates successful communities, but I really have a strong feeling that probably plays one of the largest roles.
I want to ask a challenging question here that relates to what you were saying. How do you make sure as a leader that you are held accountable for the things that you're doing that are potentially harmful or wrong? I'd like to put it out to all the panelists.
I think you can see it with narcissists, like they create buffers and barriers to get that kind of feedback. Like anything that would challenge their position in the group, you might find it hard to give that feedback. So to me, like the group practices and the group dynamics are critical, like that people share and feel regularly and feel comfortable and like do shadow work and do sovereignty practices together and have the chance to see each other do that and be humbled by each other. If you don't have an environment, that I don't know that there's another way to do that. You know what I mean? That's the checks and balances, is people feel comfortable enough to call you out.
What about everybody else, please?
Yeah, I'm finding so much of this is just, sorry. I'm finding that, sorry, I can't tell when I'm on or off.
You sound good, we hear you.
All right. I'm finding so lit up by all of this, and I kind of don't even know where to start. But yeah, having that ecology of practices, which was mentioned in the chat, you know, the different things that we do, like the you know, it can be circling or the emotional healing, or like ways that we can be vulnerable with each other. Having that be part of the structure of the space really allows for all of those things to be able to come out. And really the checks and balances, for me at least, that I can see, and so at Willow and at Maple and Monastic Academy, that we live together, and you kind of can't, there's only so much of a wall that you can put up, because you're actually just in the same space with the people all the time, or pretty much all the time. And so that allows for an environment where you kind of actually can't get away, and because people are encouraged and invited to be honest and to be vulnerable, and to be authentic, it kind of is this feedback loop where if you start behaving in some sort of way that people are being affected by negatively, that just comes out. And it might even, ideally, it comes out before it even becomes a big thing, because it can just start being something like, oh, you said that thing, I feel kind of uncomfortable about that, here's what's happening, and so on. And then like a discussion can happen as a result of that. So it's kind of those two things for me that are coming up right now. Is one is the ecology of practices, and the other is the fact that you're living in community and actually kind of can't get away from each other. And so you have to face the things that you're doing, and you have to face the consequences of them.
One related question is, for those who haven't spoken to this, please feel free to kind of address both. There have been historical examples when people lived together and the leaders' actions went unchecked. You know, we know of them as cults or some variations of thereof. So, you know, sometimes living together doesn't seem to, and even having spiritual practices don't seem to prevent those things from happening. So yeah, I'm curious what kinds of accountability practices all of you guys have to manage that.
I've got something to add on that, Evie. I think it's really rich. I'm glad we're touching on this area, because not mentioning cults at some point in a community leadership discussion is kind of missing the whole history of what tends to happen in these human organizations. And it happens for a reason. I mean, if you study all these different projects, they often start out with very good intentions. They're not all death sex cults. That tends to be the way that human groups warp, unless designed for the questions that you're asking in advance. I think it also touches on a really interesting idea of developmental hierarchy, which is kind of taboo to talk about in a lot of contexts, but different people are developed at different levels in different ways across different lines. I'm really into Hansi Freinhach's work and becoming more explicit with what people coming from a meta-modern perspective or a postmodern perspective, recognizing there's different lines, spiritual lines, leadership development lines. That also plays into this to some degree, because I think if that's spoken to, then you can start to point a little bit more clearly at which areas might be lacking. You know, if you look at these cult leaders, they're usually spiritually really advanced and psychosexually negatively advanced. So if we could lay out the leadership, you know, where are you guys lacking a little bit? And that can be kind of spoken to without there being this awkward, we all need to be perfectly equal all the time. So I think that's one aspect. Another one, obviously, is some sort of democratic system. In my mind's eye, like the ultimate system for this has some sort of a vote over time so that you can switch the leadership up if need be. I think that benevolent dictator model works in the early stages, but for me, if it's really going to go the long distance, I think there needs to be some sort of voice in who the leadership can be. So that's one way to kind of look at that. But in that interim phase of having a CEO type leader in place, I think having a kind of support crew of 1 or 2 people that are very close to that leader, that can shoot straight with them and can tell them when they're being an asshole, basically, or when they're stepping out of line, and creating that sort of accountability with people that are really, really close to you that you trust. And that's about building a culture of vulnerability from the get-go. And I think practices like circling that we're doing together, crying in front of each other, showing that we're not all powerful is a good start for that. But I like this model of like 2 people that hold you accountable and also support you emotionally. I think there's a lot to be explored in that area. So I'll pass on to other people for their ideas.
I would like to kind of play devil's advocate or challenge you there a little bit, because again, historically, often you see these often male leaders who are powerful, and they have their circle, their boys club, who all kind of, you know, supposed to keep them accountable, but don't. And what, you know, they end up actually enabling the leader to commit horrible acts of abuse and manipulation. Because they are in a position where they gain something from being in that inner circle, it becomes kind of a codependent relationship where, they end up actually insulating the leader from having any accountability for their actions.
I've seen that too. I know what you mean. It becomes like a yes man type codependent narcissist thing. So yeah, that's an interesting point.
So I'm not entirely sure if we're talking just about like forming community or communities that are already existing. I mean, my younger sister, who's spent a year living here with us at the Emerald Village, and then went and did a communities tour and ended up in a community in Virginia. I don't know. It was like she ended up in this community for like 6 months. It basically was a benevolent leader, benevolent dictatorship with one guy running the show. And as soon as she got there and told me what was happening, I was like, run, what are you doing? Get out of there. This is not going to be sustainable. Like that's not the deal. It's not going to work long term. So I am 100% against benevolent dictatorship, because there's no such thing, really. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, I think, is how the saying goes. For forming groups and for even established groups, I mean, I think, you know, I'll say, for example, what we've done here and what sociocracy, even before we had used sociocracy, is built so that it's not even possible, really. Like there is no leader. You're all contributing. It's all based on circles, a hierarchy in that way. Now, as we are coming into creating another community now, with a much bigger vision, well, I don't even want to say a bigger vision, with a different vision for the Emerald Village was to create, first and foremost, a home for our families, which we've done very successfully. This next property with 160 acres, a lot more land, and a much bigger vision with more of a regenerative educational kind of bent to it, is going to require a higher degree of tracking the vision up front. So we have four founding members right now, but we are very clear that as we find the people who are coming on to be a part of this with us, we want to co-create things like the membership structures. We don't want to have people and be like, oh, we really want to join your community. Tell us what we need to do. Like, we don't want to be the one that tells. We want to co-create. And that's very much a piece of the leadership, is we're leading in the co-creating. If you don't want to co-create, there's other communities out there that you can go be a part of, but we are all about co-creating and non-hierarchical leadership structures, so we don't run into the problem of needing the check, as you said, the accountability check. Now, all that being said, you know, there are times when there's projects, I'll say for example, here at the Emerald Village, there's projects that come up and people are working on things, and we have what's called an accountability buddy. You might have someone who works with you to make sure that you're staying on track with your goals and staying on track with actually doing the thing that you said you were going to do and following up with your budgets and things like that. But the carrot and the stick model is not, it doesn't really work for most people, like threatening punishment or offering reward. You know, I think in general, if you want people to be successful, you've got to create the context for that, which is, you know, something that's built in largely in sociocracy, where you're having a whole group of people work on a proposal. You're having a whole group of people say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that before you start making next steps? And then you have a feedback loop where you're coming back around and saying, well, how did that work? What needs to be changed? You know, so it isn't, it's, there's not so much of a risk of this like authoritarian fail. So I encourage that. I encourage that for any new founding group. You have anything to add?
I would like to
amazing.
follow up.
Really good at this.
I'd like to just follow up with a quick question. How do you manage when the founding members, like some of them have more skin in the game than others, or do you require that you all roughly have the same amount of skin in the game financially and in terms of time commitment, etc.?
Yeah, I'm the finance. I'm the finance person. So this is my sweet spot. So Occidental Arts and Ecology Center used to teach a 5-day creating communities course. You get a big folder with it. They have a whole breakdown of what is the best way to own community. And basically is probably LLC, because in LLC, you can have one member, you can have 10 members. And some people brought in no money, some people brought in 10,000, one member brought in $500,000. Though the $500,000 person doesn't need to own most of the property. They could all own equal amounts, but one member can own more money inside of that. And the person that has $500,000 in there, maybe they live on the other side of the planet and they don't want any liability of people having parties or retreats there because they have so much money in there. So they're a silent member. So there's a LLC, when you get into the operating agreements, is going to give you the most flex. But it is really important. I mean, she had a phone call with the farmers we're trying to attract, you know, and to her point of saying, like, they're asking, well, what's the membership model? And she repeated, like, the membership model is what we create when you come on board, because if you want to be a part of it, come on board. And then another talked to today, same thing. He wants to create legacy. He has money. He has a nonprofit already. So for him, just kind of, he wants it also to know how he can be, like, it's his property too, as it's all of our property. So ensuring that the whole model, the structure, makes everyone feel like when they look at it, they're like, oh, wow, I see where I belong in there. I see the safety valves. I see how I can leave there. So I'm going to go ahead and invest my money there because it feels safe. All of the communities I've helped who don't, they miss one step in there. And then they just wonder why why someone doesn't feel comfortable dropping $100,000 of their money on a piece of property where they can build a cabin, but the cabin doesn't have a legal foundation. If you haven't solved for that, you're not going to get people to bring money in. So that's part of it. And I'll put on a folder in here, but it's the folder that I give to starting communities. And inside there is the YLLC versus owning nonprofit versus owning as a church. So I'll drop that in here at some point.
And I'll just add to your question, Yuvi, about like you know, who has more skin in the game. So I'll say, as a 10-year community veteran, that whole notion of who has the most skin in the game has changed so much to me from this point, from where I was 10 years ago. When we started here, okay, before we even moved here, we weren't married yet. We were together. We weren't married yet. We didn't have kids. Some of the families had kids already, some didn't. And I was very much interested in what everybody else was doing. I was very much interested in like who's put in the most work and how much work are they doing and when are they doing the work, and like we need everything to be fair. We need to make sure that everybody's putting in their fair share. Everybody needs to do 10 hours a week, and it needs to be like that. And that is not really how life works, and it's not super sustainable either, because inevitably there will be times when one person is extremely passionate and has a whole lot of energy for a project and just pours and pours and pours without end into something and makes something happen, whether that's, you know, my husband in finding the land and finding the project, or running like the maintenance aspect of what it was to get this place going, or building systems, doing hosting and putting together events, doing like huge amounts of work on our finances. Like some of the work is very visible. It's very much obvious who did that work. Some of the work happens on a completely different plane that is not tangible at all. This is like the masculine feminine. You start to see that like there's building a house that you can see at the end of the day, and then there's tending to the relationships and tending to the children and making the food that like you don't really see that. You don't really see that, and it's very much unappreciated, but it takes just as much, if not more, time to do those kind of things. And there's understanding that sometimes we have a tremendous amount to give to our community, and sometimes we need to give to ourselves, or we need to take care of a sick family member, or we need to build our business so that we can have the money to support our life in the community. And so these things ebb and flow and build and fall back throughout time. And quite frankly, you know, the people who put the most into the community are the people who get the most out of it. And just knowing that and trusting that you don't have to have a spreadsheet that tracks it. I mean, you definitely should have project management. Don't take me as saying you don't need project management, but tracking every single hour and making sure everybody's always paid the same amount. You can feel when there's a person who's a drain versus a person who's giving. And when there's a person who's a drain, that's when you go and talk to them and say, hey, like, do you need something right now? Can we support you? It feels like you haven't really been plugging in. Am I missing something? Like, that's when you get curious and invite them, like, hey, we miss your energy. Like, what do you need right now? And invite them in. And if someone continues to be a drain and isn't playing, is just taking, that's when you say, maybe your time here is done. Like, this isn't working out. But trusting that in the arc of what you're doing as a community, which could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 40 years if you do it really well, everybody's going to have a chance to give and to receive and to be. So yeah, I just add that for, when it comes to accountability, like allowing some of these softer things and these non-tangibles to be really seen and recognized, that in a way that they're not in game A at all. So.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for that contribution. Yeah. I wanted to just remind everyone to use, the comments are just flowing now, so it's kind of hard to keep up. If you want to jump into the conversation at any point, even the panelists, there's that raise hand button in the reaction tab at the bottom. Just use that. And if your question gets asked before you have a chance, then just remember to lower your hand so we can get to you. Yeah, anyone have a question now?
We do have a question from Aaron, if we want to go to Aaron.
Sure.
Aaron, you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you.
Yeah, you got some audio issues there.
I can.
Right beside the mute button, there's a drop-down arrow. You can click and then select your microphone and speaker.
He's got it.
You hear me now?
Tech guy.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. I was doing a podcast earlier and I didn't set it back. My question was about discipline and punishment. It wasn't super concrete, but I was kind of curious about it. The panelists were just riffing on it. I was wondering, does someone in a position of leadership, should they be the person who sort of exacts discipline on people or even punishment if something is severe? Should that be delegated to someone else who's not in a leadership role? Should it be more of a group thing of handling punishment or discipline? Boundaries, is punishment even something that should ever happen in a community, or should, just kind of riffing on that idea, I guess, was my question.
I'll jump in on this and bring up NVC for a moment, nonviolent communication. I'm a big fan of work and have done some training in this regard. And OFNER, as a acronym, observation, feeling, need, request, is just a mental frame that is so helpful for me and for any who I know that uses something similar to be able to address something that's going on. Like maybe the punishment reward, if you look like Marshall Rosenberg's work around, so that we can move past that, we can move beyond frame, and this idea that there's universal needs that we all share, and let's express those and see where with in terms of that can be met would address the situation in a good way. So that's a much of a different way of looking at it. They would even say that conflict is an opportunity for deeper connection, and I've certainly seen that's true. Even though it's a lot easier to say than to practice, but it is true, and those are big pieces. I'm hoping I'm answering your question enough to say that the approach would not be the reward punishment, but more of the, like, if I'm really pissed off about something, then like for me to bottle it up doesn't seem very good for anybody, right? Or if I'm really upset all of a sudden, or someone else is, it's great for me to not have an enemy image about that person and their upsetness, and see the truth of the fact that they felt a certain way because they had a certain need that wasn't being met, and their strategy was to do something that I took as annoying or upsetting or what have you. And I think these are ways to just start to address these dynamics. And in general, I'd say the smaller things, the better, versus like letting build up over time and make these problems much larger. And of course, there's always potential within these problems, but still addressing them when they're small is a useful way to go about this, in my view.
Yeah, I'll jump in there if I can. I love that question of punishment and discipline, because until you asked it, it hadn't occurred to me that I've literally never thought about how do I like discipline this person or punish this person or something like that. And I'm not aware of that ever being in the Monastic Academy system. It was almost a jarring question. It was like, oh, punishment, why would that happen almost? And I think part of it is that there are consequences to actions that are just natural consequences. And if we're open to those, then that alone is kind of I don't even want to use the word punishment, but if like someone says that they will do something and they end up not doing it, that affects me and that affects the community. And then we say like, hey, you didn't do that thing. That sucks. And we all, when we live in this community, at least, we agree to be kind of held to a particular standard. And we agree that, when we say we'll do something, we will do it. Of course, we fail sometimes. It's not like, we're human, but kind of knowing that we are and to be in, and just seeing the consequences that happen when we're not in integrity, it actually sort of kind of puts the question of punishment or discipline aside. There was something else I had, but it's just slipped out. Oh well.
traditionally they'd use big sticks in the Zen tradition, wouldn't they? Just whack people back into line. That's an easy way to deal with it.
Yeah, those sticks aren't used for discipline though. They're used, we don't use them. They're called Keisaku sticks. They're used in meditation. They're used to release energy blocks.
I'll continue on from there a little bit. All right, I'll play a bit of a different, I'll play the devil's advocate here. Like, I would run as fast as I can away from a community that was only going to be using NVC as discipline and punishment, because I'm all about it. I think it's really powerful and we should foreground it and it should be our first line of defense. But after seeing how crazy things can get in so many different contexts, like how crazy I can get, how crazy we all are, I want to just be a bit provocative and put out there that most of us suck at being in communities, even those of us that have been working at it for ages, that humanity in general is on a really steep learning curve away from hyper individuated alienation towards reclaiming our ability to live with each other in the indigenous sense. And so I think it's a little bit ambitious not to kind of have some structure around how bigger missteps we can make and how they kind of need to be. I feel a lot of our egos are quite dense and we kind of need to be broken down in a way. And if that's not met with loving force at some points, then that gross energy can just crush all of the subtle energy that's happening within a community. So I kind of see us as like spiritual bouncers now. That's a term Peter Lindbergh's been using in the Stoa, and it really resonates with me. And also like amateur psychologists, like pseudo mothers and fathers. I know that you guys want to create a school up there on the property, UV and Mike, and this is where I go to. I think we all need to be a little bit humble. We need to recognize just how traumatized we all are in different ways and how we've got to gently unravel that together in these spaces. And I'm scared of even the idea of eco-villages or community after my last 6 or 7 years. I'm all about just being in gently unfolding spaces with people for like 6 months to a year before even considering going into that next step with them. So yeah, I think if you're going in quick, you need to have quite strong and hard rules, but I'm more about that really soft entrance process. And that's why I like the Monastic Academy approach you guys have got going on, because it's framed within the context of self-development, of inner journey. And I think that's absolutely critical. We touched on that with the spirituality before, but yeah, you look at the monastic system, like it's been around for thousands of years because it works. It's structure and order with a firm core on self-discipline. But then if you step out of line, I'm pretty sure you're going to hear about it pretty quickly. And I think we've got to modernize that in a way, but that's our balance. How can we bring that love and compassion that's also very clear? Because the tyranny of structurelessness is a thing. And it's been the major tripping point of most of the interesting projects I've looked at over the last few decades. So yeah, that's my semi-passionate provocation.
Just to respond on the NVC thing, Joe, I think it's worth noting that I'm coming from the context of having sociocracy as a structure and NVC being a part of that. Like, if that wasn't the case, then I think things would be very challenging. And also, I look at NVC as mainly holding a lot paradigmatic weight in terms of just how we're viewing what's actually happening. Meaning, like, the way that I would view what's happening isn't this is an enemy who is a problem that I must punish, but it's viewing this is a living organism who is using a certain strategy right now, resulted in some needs being met or unmet. And it's a sort of a bridge into a compassionate holding of space and of viewing phenomena, for me anyway. And I definitely think there's significant other pieces to it. And I was coming at it from like before you get to the point where like pushed into that level, having direct, frank conversations of where you're at and requests for the other person. If we don't do those things, these problems just, they calcify and they get even more tricky, you know?
I agree.
I agree, Chris. I wasn't, yeah, I was just being provocative based on the back of what you were saying there. But NVC is a good example because you need training in that, right? So people need to have gone through some level of training, maybe for like a year, because NVC when you're sitting with someone in a workshop is different from the NVC when you're wanting to throttle the other person. And I'm interested in how do we gauge that level of experiencing and test with each other? Like, I would put up like a sort of a test in that regard. Like I wouldn't be afraid to put people through situations to see how they respond before going into such a deep, wicked sink that we want to create these contexts. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's obviously like a preference for non-violent communication, for like resolving things comfortably and amicably and softly. But I think there's also an important part of this that we need to give customized feedback to the person we're in community with. And some people need different types of feedback. I personally actually kind of like aggressive feedback just because that's my background. That's the way I was raised. And it's like, there's a bit of fun in this like aggressive back and forth sometimes. And to other people kind of watching that happen, it might be very uncomfortable. To me, it's just like the most straightforward, clean way to receive feedback sometimes. I'm not saying across the board, but yeah, like there is a need for, I don't know, for lack of a better term, violent communication sometimes. There's a need sometimes for like strong feedback. And sometimes the people who need that type of feedback aren't going to receive anything but. They're not going to receive subtle feedback, and they may continue to dominate the discussion.
I think there's also something to be said about
authentic communication.
There's something to be said about allowing anger as well. Anger is a normal emotion, and we can accept that sometimes it's going to come out. Like that could just be a part of how communication is. Of course, if it takes over all the time, then to create a space where you can actually be angry and it's safe to be angry is, I think, really important.
Yeah,
Totally.
you can angry NVC if you really want. I mean, and it's like I think that there's also just like how close folks have gotten in with work as well, because on a surface level or even just a little bit of time, it can sometimes be counter beneficial at times actually having it. So there's also just what we think this technology.
We're coming up to the last 8 minutes here, so I just wanted to share that. Lena, I'll have you jump in, but I just wanted to give that little warning then, and then maybe we can get Evan's question in if he's got one before we finish.
This is super quick. There's just this really beautiful framework that I love, and it is 2 triangles. So there's the victim triangle, where we hold the victim, and then there's always going to be a prosecutor and a hero. And so we're constantly wrapping our minds around how to assist this triangle in its form, and it's super limiting and isolating in that way, because we're always trying to have this victim punishment persecutor dynamic. But then there's also the triangle of the creator, the challenger, and the coach. And so in that form, there's actually room for authentic expression and real allowance of the emotional body, the psychological awarenesses that we're really processing at a very fundamental level. But there is also space for us to not rule out or separate ourselves from the true dynamic that's at play here, which is to go back to how we're taking accountability also, which is radical self-responsibility and understanding the growth that can come from every situation that we find ourselves in with dynamics with other people.
Evan, go ahead. Mike and you, if you had something.
I was just going to prompt Evan.
Great.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. So my question is, how do you determine the roles of members in your community or organization?
Go for it.
Hey, so roles of members. So when we started 10 years ago, I think we used a holographic model to try to understand where everybody's strengths were. Is someone more of a CEO material? Is someone more of a therapist material, or holding the vibe? And I sort of got wrapped into completer. At the time, I was like, what role is completer? You know, I'm cleaning up the last 5% of the trash or finishing the projects that everyone starts. But over the years, I found like that sort of what in that sense, we look at the whole diagram of all the people and how they play in this, and are able to look, hey, the vibe keeper, the person who's really good at communication, maybe they're not working as much, but they're the person who can go out and get 40 friends to come to a work party and do more hours than anybody could do in a year. So some of that I think is a little bit of magic to figure out roles. And the other part really is just breaking down simply, if you use sociocracy, is breaking down, these are the, do you need a retreat team leader? Do you need a retreat circle? Do you need a finance circle? Do you need a maintenance circle? Do you need HR? Is really looking at all those things and then gravitating, understanding the scope of work for each one of those circles. The land circle here, they're putting in hours every week and it's real direct. And the finance circle is a little more personal and done in gluts of work. So I think it's a mixture between a little bit of the magic and then, Diana, she when she comes out here to visit, she definitely says, look, the thing about community, these successful communities always tend to be highly organized. They're highly organized groups. They're definitely running a business. There's, 13 toilets in your community, lots of showers, food, things that break down, and lots of businesses and lots of money coming through. So I think at some level, choosing members and figuring out membership is kind of running it like a business, and then just being really smart about breaking it down and what's intended for members. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add that there's a piece that kind of ties the last question and this question together, which is really around training. As you're looking for members to be in your existing community, or you're looking for people to co-create community with, one of our questions is, what have you done? What's your training? What's your skill? Like, have you taken an NVC workshop? Have you taken one of Diana Leaf Christian's, like, how to create a successful eco village, or sociocracy classes? Have you visited? How many intentional communities have you visited? Is this something that you're just like kind of thinking about, or have you actually invested your time and energy into getting training around? And so as you are answering those questions for yourself and the other people in your group, you can see like, oh, well, probably the people who are trained in communication or who are a therapist by trade would be good for doing something like human relations. Those kind of things sort of fall naturally into alignment. But yeah, I'm a huge advocate also for something that Diana also preaches about, which is getting a budget inside of whatever your annual budget is, specifically for training, and inviting people to come and train your community, or having certain community members go and take courses once a year or twice a year, whatever you have the budget for, so that you're always growing. And that could be even somebody takes an accounting course. It doesn't have to just be an NVC workshop that you're taking, but always growing and learning more skills and becoming more adept at doing the thing that you're doing, which is living in community.
Guys, we're just at the end here. I'd love to keep this conversation going. We do these calls once a month, same time. And if you want to get access to the recording of this one, we're going to post it inside the community at futurethinkers.org/members. And then, yeah, join for the next one. We'd love to see a lot of your faces again.
You can RSVP at futurethinkers.org/summit.
Yeah, that's right. Tyson, are we missing anything here?
I just want to say thank you so much to the people today for sharing so deeply. It's really easy to get stuck in a surface level thing around stuff like this. And like Joe opening with like, yeah, my community kind of had a civil war last year, was just like, oh, right, we're doing this, yeah, that really got me engaged from the get-go.
Yeah,
so
thank you,
Joe. I want to really speak to appreciation for that. And I'm interested to know, how could communities like this go deeper into really helping, Joe was saying, like, I want to think more, I want to understand how that happened more. And it's like, how can we help you, Joe, right, is basically what I wanted to say. So, I mean, feel free to connect with me one-on-one about that, but also community, blah, blah, blah.
Just want to say thanks. Also, there's a bunch of partners that joined us here on the call tonight, obviously, besides the amazing James Ehrlich from ReGen Villages, Greg Hoffer from Tree Construction, and I saw Christopher Johnson from Intelligent City, and Laurel Tincher is here, one of our new advisors. She'll be kind of in the group here and socializing about all these topics.
Yeah, thank you so much to each of the panelists here today. I want to encourage anyone that wants to learn more about them or their work to check out the links that are listed in the document there, and any other relevant links, such as many of the resources mentioned, RSVPing for the next summit, joining the community. It's all in there as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tyson. All right, guys. See you next month. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.